Hello and welcome viewers, I'm Pia and you're watching NewsX Eurozone. On that note, let's take a look at news making headlines this hour. US and Russia find no compromise on key territory issue after talks regarding the war with Ukraine. Kremlin has stated that talks with the United States were useful, but there is a lot of work ahead. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has urged continued pressure on Russia, calling the territorial issue the most difficult. He has added that he hopes to meet US representatives very soon. Russian President Vladimir Putin has stated that Russia does not seek war with European powers, but is ready to fight if Europe pursues a direct conflict. He has also accused Europe of blocking US President Donald Trump's Ukraine peace efforts. NATO foreign ministers are meeting in Brussels to discuss alliance priorities and security concerns, with the war in Ukraine topping the agenda. Leaders are aiming to coordinate support and outline next steps for regional stability. French President Emmanuel Macron has landed in Beijing, where he is expected to meet his Chinese counterpart Xi Jinping and discuss trade relations between the two countries. Britain has delayed its decision for a third time on China's plan to build Europe's largest embassy in London. Beijing has warned the setback risks damaging bilateral trust amid concerns the site could enable spying activities. The Trump administration has halted immigration applications from nationals of 19 countries already facing US travel restrictions, with the USCIS stating that processing delays are necessary to protect national security. US Ambassador to the UN Mike Waltz is set to visit Israel with his counterpart next week. The two will then tour the country from the 8th of December to the 10th. Well, viewers, those are the headlines and our top focus. Russian presidential envoy Kirill Dmitriev has called the peace talks between Russian President Vladimir Putin and US President Donald Trump's special envoy Steve Witkoff as productive. Meanwhile, Kremlin aide Yuri Ushakov has stated that the 5-hour-long conversation was constructive but has made no breakthrough on the peace pact itself. Ushakov has added that no compromise was reached on territorial concessions by Ukraine. He's described the talks as useful, but has emphasized that there's still a lot of work to be done and that contacts between the United States and Russia with regards to this will continue. Meanwhile, US President Donald Trump has called the war in Ukraine quote-unquote a mess and not an easy situation to resolve at his final cabinet meeting of 2025. With us joining on the broadcast is Mr. Ben Aries, a journalist from Berlin. Thank you so much for taking our time and speaking to us on NewsX World. Of course, there was a lot of murmur yesterday with regards to Steve Witkoff's visit to Moscow. There were 5-hour-long talks that were held between Witkoff and Putin, but it still seems that US and Russia are not seeing eye to eye, particularly on the question of territorial concessions.
Indeed. No, it was a positive meeting, I think. I mean, they seem to actually have agreed and ticked off on the 28-point list that the Americans floated last week or 10 days ago, that there were several points on there that they've actually agreed on. But as you said, as Ushakov said, that the sticking point is the territories. And to understand what's going on here, I mean, Putin's going into these talks basically as a victor in the war, and he's not prepared to make any concessions at all. But you have to understand his mentality. It's not just about ending this war and doing some sort of bodged deal to get a ceasefire. That's like Ukraine's position. They just want to stop the killing, stop the spending. What Putin's trying to do here is put something solid, long-lasting into place. And that boils down to the issue of territories. So it's not good enough just to occupy Donbass or Crimea. What he wants to do is use his advantage, use the desire in the West to end this war, to get the West to sign off de jure recognition of Russia's sovereignty over those territories. So it's not just practically occupied, that they become, in effect, in the eyes of the international community and in international law, they become Russian sovereign territory. And that's a really big ask. That's really difficult to do. The compromise that was suggested was that the West would de facto recognize that. And that was watered down because the Trump administration is suggesting that they might de jure, in law, recognize it as Russia, but then they wouldn't require the Ukrainians to recognize it. So as far as the Ukrainians are concerned, it remains sovereign Ukraine territory. It's just in dispute. Like, I don't know, Cyprus is a good example, which is the same sort of setup. And that's where they've got stuck on. So they've made progress, but this point about, you know, who owns Donbass is a key point, and Putin's dug his heels in.
All right, so requesting you to stay on with us as we're tracking further updates as far as the talks and the war itself are concerned. We're now learning that the Kremlin has commented on the discussions with the United States regarding a means to end this conflict, describing the talks as a first exchange of opinions. Kremlin officials have stated that some proposals were accepted while others were rejected as unacceptable, emphasizing that this is part of a normal working process. They have stressed that the results of these discussions should serve as a basis for high-level talks between Russia and US as well. And Kremlin has also warned that certain approaches could doom Europe to becoming less competitive. Officials, meanwhile, have clarified that it would be wrong to claim that President Putin outrightly rejected the US plan, highlighting that negotiations are still underway. In further developments, NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte has stated that it is good that peace talks to end the war in Ukraine are underway, but that it is necessary to make sure that Ukraine is in the strongest possible position to sit at the table. His comments have come as NATO foreign ministers have arrived for a meeting at the alliance's headquarters in Brussels to discuss security issues and the war between Russia and Ukraine. Listen in to what Mark Rutte had to say.
Again, Ukraine. How do we make sure that Ukraine stays as strong as possible? The peace talks are ongoing. That's good. But at the same time, we have to make sure that whilst they take place, and we are not sure when they will end, that Ukraine is in the strongest possible position to keep the fight going, to fight back against the Russians, but also in the strongest possible position when peace talks really get to a point where they sit at the table.
Still with us on the broadcast is Mr. Ben Aris. So we've just heard what Mark Rutte has had to say. What was also a part of the original plan that was being discussed, and of course amendments were then made. A lot was being talked about regarding the NATO-style security guarantee being provided to Ukraine. This is something that the European allies have been pushing forward in particular. Russia has of course not made any public comment as far as this is concerned, but what sort of issues would Russia have if US does go ahead and factor in this particular demand that the Europeans have been making? Russia is of course concerned with another NATO country right on its doorstep, that to Ukraine.
Several things here to unpack it. Firstly, to note that the Europeans have actually now been cut out of the process altogether. That there was the original plan 10 days ago from the States, a joint work with Dmitriev. The Russians helped draw that up in an acceptable form to the Kremlin. And then there was the Geneva summit where the Europeans came in with lots of amendments. But before going to see Putin, the White House has classified any further talks that they rejected most of the European suggestions as completely unworkable. The Kremlin made it crystal clear that they would reject most of the European points out of hand. And then Witkoff met with the Ukrainian delegation at the weekend before he flew to Moscow, and they had a last go at persuading him to include some of their talking points. But Witkoff said after that meeting that there were many issues, quote unquote, unresolved. So it didn't help. As for Rutte and his strongest possible position formula, I mean, this has been since the Biden administration, but it's both meaningless and even disingenuous, because NATO and the West has not put Ukraine into the strongest position possible, because it's not sent the weapons that Ukraine needs and that Zelensky was asking for from day one, nor the money to put it into a strong position. It's actually an incredibly weak position the key logistics hub of Pokrovsk in the Donbass that underpins the whole defenses, has just fallen to the Russians. And the other part of that formula is just that, you know, no one's pretending Ukraine can win this war. And by strong position, they're trying to suggest that Ukraine has a strong military hand, so it has some cards to play in the negotiations. But as Trump himself said, you don't have any cards. And so he's actually in a weak position. And to continue this talk makes the Europeans feel good because they sent, you know, the odd 10 million here and half a dozen tanks there. But they haven't equipped Ukraine. They haven't put troops into the field. They haven't put it in a position where it threatens Russia with defeat, so that you have a real negotiation of equals. Like I said in the previous segment, that Putin is treating this like a victory tour, and he's making extreme demands, and he's just waiting for the other side to cave in. And he keeps repeating, look, either you accept my terms or we'll just keep fighting. And he intends to do that. Again, with the European threats, one of the NATO generals was saying we should do some preemptive strikes against Russia. And Putin's like, bring it on. If you want to go to war with Russia, I will do that. And the thing with Putin throughout this conflict is that what's been shocking is that he's always been prepared to go to the most extreme options. So I don't think that threat of Russia being prepared to go to war with Europe, if it has to, is an empty threat.
Right, so requesting you to stay on with us. We're tracking some other very crucial developments. You, of course, referred to the fact that, Ukraine's requests for weapons were denied. US did not allow the Tomahawks to be sent across. The money as well has been blocked for years. There were plans to use frozen Russian assets, but we've seen the Hungarians block it numerous times. But now we're learning that German Foreign Minister Johann Wattfull has stated that Germany has taken Belgium's concerns over the use of Russian frozen assets very seriously, emphasizing that it should be possible to find a solution to those concerns if all allies stand together. This, of course, comes as Belgian Foreign Minister Maxime Prévost has stated that Belgium's concerns on the use of the assets to fund Ukraine are not addressed by the European Commission's proposals. Listen in to what the two leaders have stated.
The letter of my Prime Minister outlined again clearly our concerns. In short, the necessary guarantees for Euroclear, full mutualization of the risks, and go beyond Euroclear and Belgium. These are legitimate and reasonable concerns. Our door has always remained open and still is. However, we have the frustrating feeling of not having been heard. Our concerns are being downplayed. The text the Commission will table today do not address our concerns in a satisfactory manner.
Die Regierung arbeitet darauf hin, dass wir im Europäischen Rat einen entsprechenden Beschluss fassen können, dass wir die eingefrorenen russischen Vermögenswerte nutzbar machen können. Das muss auf einer sicheren Rechtsgrundlage geschehen. Daran arbeitet die Kommission und wird die Vorschläge jetzt präsentieren. Wir unterstützen das und wir nehmen die belgischen Sorgen selbstverständlich ernst. Sie sind berechtigt, aber das Thema ist lösbar. Dann lösbar, wenn wir gemeinsam bereitstehen, Verantwortung zu übernehmen. Deutschland ist dazu bereit und ermutigt alle Mitgliedstaaten, das ebenso zu tun. Ich bin sehr zuversichtlich, dass am Ende der Vorschlag des Bundeskanzlers sich durchsetzen wird.
Meanwhile, Belgium has demanded that other EU countries guarantee to cover all legal costs arising from Russian lawsuits against the scheme. It also wants them to guarantee that they would help provide money quickly to pay Russia back if a court ever ruled Moscow must be refunded. Thirdly, Belgium has demanded that other countries holding Russian frozen assets also make those funds available to Ukraine. Still with us on the broadcast is Mr. Ben Aries. Interesting developments, considering yesterday we heard the spokesperson for Kremlin, Dmitry Peskov, while giving a press conference here in India, he'd highlighted that what Europe is doing with the frozen assets is practically theft. He's called it that, he's used the word, the Europeans are stealing Russian money. What do you make of Russia's stance? How successful is Russia likely to be if it drags the EU and the European Commission to court?
It's true. It would be theft. The problem is that it's unprecedented that the EU is able to freeze that money, but it has no right under European law, particularly the European strong property laws, to confiscate that money. The only way they can do that is if Europe declares war on Russia. Then it becomes legally possible to take it. And it's never been done before. I mean, multiple wars that the reserves of various central banks in Iraq and Afghanistan, etc., have been frozen by the West. But at the end of the war, they're always given back because technically it remains Russia's property. And the Kremlin, I mean, this is why the reparation loans, there's going to be a meeting on December 18, 19 to decide on this issue. And it's the only money available to the EU. The US has sent no money whatsoever, and it used to account for 40%. And Ukraine is facing an economic crisis because of the lack of funds. They're trying to get the budget through this week. And there's like 12 billion missing for the end of this year, and there's something like 65 billion missing for next year. And there's 140 billion sitting in Belgium in a Russian account that they want to take, but they're not going to be able to. The ECB came out yesterday and said, like, we're not backing that loan either because it's not on our mandate, it's illegal. And so it's clear that this whole reparation loan thing is going to fail unless the EU ignores the law and confiscates it. And if that happens, then you undermine the trust in the euro, you undermine the trust in the entire European banking sector. And so everybody doesn't want to go there. And the final point I'll make is Belgium saying, all right, we will do it, but we're going to go to court. That's certain. The Russians will sue and will probably lose. And so the rest of Europe, all the other member states, have to share the burden with us because at the moment, Belgium's on the hook for 140 billion, which it could have to pay back in a week. And pointedly, none of the other European states are willing to share that risk. They're going to leave it to Belgium. So the Belgians are just refusing point blank. We're not going to take on a liability of 140 billion by ourselves and have to pay it back if the courts say so. And the Europeans are not going along with it either, which means they all think that they're going to lose in court as well. So it's, as I say, the EU probably come up with a couple of tens of billions to get Russia through the spring. But then this whole funding crisis is going to reappear sometime at the end of spring, start of summer, and it can't be resolved. The EU is, in recession. It just doesn't have the money to continue to fund this war.
Indeed, sir. Requesting you to stay on with us. We're tracking one last piece of information. This is, of course, pertaining to what's happening on the ground itself as far as the war is concerned. We're now learning that Russian officials have claimed that Ukraine launched more than 40 drones and multiple munitions at the Belgorod border region over the past 24 hours. This marks one of the largest attacks reported there in recent weeks. Regional emergency authorities have also stated that strikes hit the Shebekino area twice, damaging buildings, vehicles and equipment, and also injuring 2 men when a drone targeted a car. Russia has reported its air defenses shot down 17 Ukrainian drones across several districts, including Belgorodsky, Gubkinsky, Valuisky and Staroskolsky, with no casualties in those particular areas. Another 10 drones were intercepted over the Chernyansky district, where assessments are still underway. Regional leaders have stated that response teams remain deployed as they assess damage and monitor ongoing security threats along the border. This, of course, comes as on the ground, the Russian Defense Ministry has confirmed that Russian forces have taken control of Chervon in Ukraine's Zaporizhia region. Stay with us on the broadcast is Mr. Ben Aris. Interesting development. Russia, of course, putting forth its own statistics. We've also seen reports from the Ukrainian Defense Ministry highlight that most of these overnight attacks that take place, sometimes Russia launches more than 500 drones and targeting energy infrastructure specifically. What do you make of the situation on the front lines? In fact, just yesterday, we'd seen claims by Russia that it had taken over Pokrovsk completely. We don't know whether this has been confirmed by the Ukrainians or not. There seems to be no word out from Kiev as of now. But is there any good reason to believe Russia's claims? And if true, how much of an impact is this on Ukraine's key logistics hub being taken away? And if not, then why would Russia bluff?
Russia's not bluffing. No, the numbers, you can question the exact numbers, but the scale has definitely gone up. As for Pokrovsk, I mean, it's largely fallen, but reports from the Ukrainian side say it hasn't, and that street fighting is going on, but it appears the bulk of the city is now occupied by Russia. Now, what you're detailing here is another part of the negotiations, and this is how negotiations are done in Eastern Europe, is that you have the diplomatic part, which was the meeting yesterday, but you have the kinetic part. And what both sides have done, Ukraine has done this as well under Poroshenko, is you ramp up the attacks when you're going into talks to put pressure on the other side. And there's been a steady escalation, and it's gone through various phases. In the first phase, it was about tanks and soldiers in the first year. In about 2023, the drone war started with Ukraine innovation bringing in commercial cheap drones that have now become more sophisticated. And Russia's matched that, and it responded and escalated again in about May this year when this became a missile war, where Russia started. It's put its whole economy onto a war footing, and it's ramped up, particularly missile production, because Ukraine has very little defense against that, other than what the Americans have been providing in the forms of things like Patriots. And so Putin is now turning the screw. He wants to finish this war, and he wants to do it soon because the Russian economy is really suffering. I mean, the budget deficit in Russia is becoming a big problem, and he wants to bring it to an end. And so he's hitting everything. He's hitting Kiev with missiles that are getting through because they've run out of Patriots. He's hitting the energy, what's left of it. They've already destroyed half of it in order to plunge the country into a freezing dark winter. And we're seeing 500 drones. There's huge new factories just beyond the Urals that are churning these things out. And the same with missiles. They've doubled the production of that, and they're now in surplus. They're making more than they're firing. And poor Ukraine is fighting back as best it can. I mean, Ukraine's making 4 million drones a year, which is an extraordinary result. But it's started to make its own missiles, but it doesn't have very many of them. And Zelensky's doing the same thing. He's flying long-range drones to hit Russian oil refineries, striking targets inside Russia. This is new, in order to put the pressure back on Russia, in order to hurt the budget by reducing oil revenues, which is working to an extent. And it's a question of chicken, who's going to collapse first?
Yeah, who's going to collapse and who's going to hold on? With that said, I'd like to thank you for taking out time, of course, sharing your analysis and insights with us on NewsX World today. On that note, viewers, we're tracking some breaking updates coming in from Hong Kong. We're learning that the Hong Kong police has informed that the death toll from the blaze that affected the Wang Fuk Court apartments has risen to 159 after all the affected housing blocks have been searched. The blaze, remember, engulfed Wang Fuk Court in the northern Tai Po district, becoming the world's deadliest residential building fire since 1980. Now, according to the police in Hong Kong, 159 bodies have been found, out of which 140 have been identified. At least 91 women and 49 men and a 1-year-old baby had lost their lives in this fire. Shifting focus to news coming in from the United Kingdom, Britain has now delayed the decision on whether to approve China's contentious plan to build the largest embassy in Europe in London for the third time, prompting China to warn that the latest setback risks undermining trust between the two sides. Now, China's plans for a new embassy on site of a 2-century-old building near the Tower of London has been stalled for the past 3 years because of opposition by local residents, lawmakers and Hong Kong pro-democracy campaigners in the United Kingdom. The major concerns are that the new embassy could be used as a base for spying. This has prompted some politicians in Britain and the United States as well to urge the UK government to block Beijing's plans. Meanwhile, Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson Lin Jian has responded. Listen in to what he had to say.
中方的馆舍规划申请早已完备，英方再次推迟批准，没有任何道理。所谓的理由，完全站不住脚。中方对此严重关切，强烈不满。我们将认真地评估形势，维护自身的正当利益。
With us on the broadcast is Mr. Shyam Batra, British politician and former mayoral candidate for London, joining us. Thank you so much for taking out time and speaking to us on NewsX World. It seems that it's the third time that the United Kingdom is now delaying this project. The Chinese are not really taking this piece of news quite warmly. It does seem to irritate them because it's a project that has been stalled for 3 years now. How is Britain going to balance its economic considerations with China on one hand and the very real national security concerns? Because we have seen examples of the Chinese not just using their embassies as a base to spy, but also prop up police stations in sovereign territories of other countries. There were reports earlier that came in from the United States and Canada as well. So what are the UK's concerns, and how is the government going to really balance all of this?
Well, thank you for having me once again. I'm Shyam Batra. I want to just point out now that I think these problems have been quite systemic. They've been going on for quite a long time. I think it also didn't help that the then former Prince Andrew was working, shall we say, with one of these guys from China. And it may have broken national security. And this is why, even though the new building is supposed to come up in the Royal Mint is a very old place, and there are a lot of people opposing it anyway in the local area. They are quite scared and worried. But China seems to have grown dramatically in all spheres, and it seems to want to have a big presence in the United Kingdom so it can also serve Europe. But we have to control our security in our country. Now, normally I wouldn't align with the Prime Minister, but I would on this occasion because this is about our country. We don't really need our information being divulged, data taken, and other sources of stuff, because today we've got technological wars going on. China is very, very good at this sort of stuff. Now, the frustration has grown quite deeply because it is the largest building in Europe for an embassy that's ever been taken off. But I mean, it looks like that the recent tension between London and Beijing over China's plan to build would be Europe's largest embassy. But having said that, the UK has delayed its decision yet again. I think, if I'm not wrong, today in question time at midday, there will be a talk on this situation. But Britain has postponed its approval right now for China's embassy and redevelopment plan, now for the third time, as you quite rightly said. But the project was intended to be formed at the Royal Mint. The Royal Mint is a huge building. It's one of UK's oldest iconic buildings. And because of the security concerns, and not only that, the public are very worried to have China on their doorstep near the Tower of London. So I think we've got to get to the bottom of what's really happening, because there is a political obstruction, of course, and there is concerns that leakage has already erupted and happened during this phase. So we are really concerned about our national security, and it's quite right that we should take a stance on this until matters are concluded. If not, then there will be no embassy in China for the UK.
Indeed, you have mentioned that if this continues, it could lead to a diplomatic fallout between the two countries as well. Interestingly speaking, on the channel just a few weeks ago, we were discussing an MI5 warning that was given, a report that was published that a load of young Chinese individuals are using LinkedIn as a platform to network with members of parliament and then in turn spy on them over the years. What sort of alarm bells has this raised? You know, there was also a case earlier. That particular case was dismissed by the courts. It was a spying scandal again. There were 2 Chinese individuals that were suspected of spying. The UK government did then take a more balanced stand, not really a stand that was in line with the concerns that the larger public had with regards to national security. So what sort of signaling and messaging is the UK trying to send by practically doing a 180 between just a couple of months back and right now?
Well, it's funny you said about the MI5. That's correct. I think Andrew has got a lot to do with this situation, and there's been no investigation as to why and how he comforted this gentleman from China, and maybe have shared a lot of secrets. I don't know, but there has been no investigation on this, and I think there should be a public inquiry regarding Andrew and this counterpart that happened, because this really fused the whole situation. I mean, MI5 say that Chinese state actors are engaging in espionage efforts, recruitment and outreach. And quite rightly, you said that they're not just using LinkedIn, but they're using lots of other platforms. There's TikTok as well, don't forget, well, which was in the US owned by the US on their counterpart. But the UK, I assume, is still with China. So, I mean, the head of MI5, Ken McCallum, has publicly described Chinese linked espionage as a daily threat to the UK's national security. And as I repeat, this, I think, is to do with national security more than anything. And it needs to be, we need to protect our country first. Until we've investigated and seen what the real problems are, then we can deal with it. But I think, in short, this is going to be a political war. It's going to be, it could be, I mean, recently or time, maybe in most of the countries around the world as well, there's been so much cyber threats and so many things have broken down in our system. Now, we could blame Russia, we could blame China. We don't know where all this is coming from, but it's very important that, quite rightly, MI5, Ken McCallum clearly said publicly that there is espionage going on. There is something happening, because they are our MI5 is a secret service at the end of the day. They are here to protect our country, but even still, I don't think, I think the tensions are going to escalate, but I don't think they're going to end up anywhere, because after all, this is an embassy, and our country does have the right to refuse anybody coming to our embassy, or close it down even, or not even continue with it. And I don't know how much money has passed hands with this matter at the moment, but as far as I know, it has been going on for the last 3 years. But this has escalated far more. And I really do think someone should investigate the conversation that Andrew had with this other gentleman who remains unknown for now. But at the end of the day, with the other 2, I'm hoping that they have been arrested, etc., and that they're seeking information from them. But we really do need to protect our security. We don't just have the borders. As I said before, it's cyber security now. It's all this situation with the world right now, where we're all on the internet everywhere. A lot of our data is leaked. And how do we protect it? So we need some very, very secure systems in, and we don't want to be hammered again and again. I mean, I think last week the phone systems all went down with Vodafone and another carrier, and it can't be just out of the blue. It's obviously happening quite often. So I think that there's going to be significant tensions going on about this embassy being opened. And why so big? Why do we need such a huge embassy from China? It could be just a small embassy like anybody else. They could have been nice and simple, but no, they have to go big depots, you know, because they're growing and they are a serious player in the rest of the world.
Absolutely.
Whether there's going to be some kind of tension with our Prime Minister and Xi Jinping, I don't know. But I think our Prime Minister must have a dialogue with China, and rather than just sitting back and just saying we're postponing it right now.
Interesting observation towards the end. Of course, you've mentioned China's growing role in global geopolitics. Of course, it seems that it's some way through optics, it's trying to project that through building this massive embassy. With that, sir, I'd like to thank you for taking our time, of course, sharing your insights and perspective with us on NewsX World on this very delicate issue. On that note, viewers, due to paucity of time, it's a wrap on this bulletin. More news and updates on the other side. Stay tuned on NewsX World.